So for our next session, we'll be speaking to Chloe Maclellan from Children North East, and specifically about looking at poverty, programming for poverty from an arts and cultural perspective, and have an opportunity to engage looking at those issues and kind of relating them back to our own practice places. So without further ado, I'll welcome Chloe. And just what
I'll,
like Chloe? One,
I'll just share my screen as
you can
well.
see. There you go. There's Chloe.
Um, Hoping you can all see that okay. Um,
Yes, I can. Yep.
uh, okay. Hello, my name is Chloe Maclellan. I'm the Poverty Proofing Team Manager for Communities, Early Years, Arts and Culture at Children North East. I'll explain a little bit more later on about what poverty proofing is and what that actually means. Um, but just to cover what we're going to look at. So Georgina's done a wonderful job kind of sharing the context in the UK and explaining that really well. I've been jotting down how to explain it better in my training. So it's been wonderful to hear it from a different organisation's kind of perspective. Um, but some of the statistics I'll share around the specifics relating to arts and culture and what that means for, or how Children North East approach kind of the definitions of poverty. And then we've got some case study examples of the changes that have come out of the work that we've completed, got a little bit around exploring the barriers together with some kind of collective ideation around some of the solutions. So hopefully you can hear from each other around what you're already doing, some of that positive practice that Georgina mentioned before, and then some key questions to take away with you to begin the journey and start to think about it. We always put a content warning on our training just to flag to anyone that there are topics around kind of financial difficulty, around stigma, and some of the things that relate to poverty. So if you do need to step away, it's quite nice online. It's quite subtle if you need to step away. Nobody's there's no kind of judgment here if you need to leave or it becomes too much. Just look after yourself. That being said, it's not too intense. I'll try and keep it lighthearted. So exactly as Georgina was saying earlier, the definition of poverty within the UK, and this definition of comparing the median 60% of the median income is something that you can use across different countries to be able to compare the poverty levels in across the areas. So just as we were saying before, that that is quite a static number, and it's not very inclusive of various factors. It's looking at families as a number rather than looking at the experience that that family has. And so, as an organisation, and as many charities that work in this area or this field do, we tend to think about families living in poverty if they lack the resources to obtain the types of diet, participate in activities, or have the living conditions or amenities which are customary or at least widely encouraged and approved in the societies to which they belong. So with this, we're thinking that poverty is relative, and if you live in a society where it is typical that children will have fresh fruit and vegetables each day, they'll have a coat to wear to school, and they'll participate in after school clubs and sports and arts and cultural venues or activities, then missing out on those things is seen as someone that may be in poverty. So when we're talking about it, much as we were saying before, it's not just about those families that are registered for free school meals. It is much wider than that. And when we're working with a community or a setting, we're not kind of trying to identify who might be or who might not be living in poverty. Again, I'll explain a little bit more of what I mean by that later on. Um, but for a bit of context, there is 100,000 children in the UK who don't have a warm winter coat to be able to wear to school or go out to kind of heritage or arts and cultural properties. It's something that we've heard quite a lot recently in our work. There are 3.2 million children in the UK who won't have a week-long holiday away from home in a year. So when we're thinking about children's experiences of school or even just um, activities they might do outside of school, that natural conversation of what did you get up to over the holidays can be more difficult for some families than others. Um, and with that, we're not meaning a holiday abroad, it's just spending time away from home. So we hear quite a lot as well when we're working with arts and culture and with schools about the cultural capital. And when you've got children that have got very different experiences through the summer or in the evenings or in the weekends, they have a much different range of ideas and a range of backgrounds to draw from when they are engaging in school. I remember doing creative writing with a year 6 class, and the difference between the children that had walked through a forest describing a forest setting and the children who hadn't, and we're just going from a picture is vastly different. The language they can use, the senses they can involve is different. So that's what we're thinking about when we say cultural capital, not just that who's been on trips and things like that. Right, to get things started then, I hoping some people have got phones, and if not, I'll put this link in the chat now. Um, I'd like you to answer the question with just kind of simple phrases or words. So, what are the impacts of poverty that you've seen in your work or with the people that you work with? I'll stop sharing now and I'll put the link in the chat and share the right screen so we can see the thoughts coming in. So hopefully it'll let you put some ideas in. It'll create as a lovely cloud of the thoughts that you've got. The QR code's just in the top right there if you missed it. The question was, what's the impact or what have you seen in terms of poverty within the work that you do? Um, fab. So we've got, yeah, attending lessons, music clubs, school trips. There might be difficulty in attending those things, definitely. Um, yeah, absolutely. So some of the bigger the word, the more people that have said it. So there's lots of people saying that attendance or attending, um, children lacking things, transport. Yeah, absolutely. There's things like embarrassed, isolation, well-being. Yeah. Hmm. I'll stop sharing now. Feel free to, if you're still typing, just add a couple more and I'll share that with you afterwards as well. Exactly that. So just wanted to capture some of your thoughts or your experiences around what you've seen in your work. Um, because the way that poverty affects families is different with every family in every area, and the way it affects what you might see in your work will be different as well. Okay, so there's some consequences that come with or might be incurred by families that are living in poverty. Um, so some of the consequences that they might face are that is that physical health, and that might affect attendance in settings or in programs if they've signed up to an event, for example, and they've got more health, they may not no longer be able to make it. You're more likely, if you live in poverty, to have a serious illness or long term health problem. infant mortality is actually twice as likely in the 10 most deprived areas than the least most deprived areas. That's a statistic from a few years ago in 2020. There is a much higher risk of kind of lung and respiratory issues due to that unfit housing or lack of access to high quality healthcare. In our poverty proofing work, we work with schools or education settings, health settings, and arts and culture. And so in the health work, we quite often see how it all, when we all come together, we see how it all links up, that, you know, your health affects your education, affects your access to wider community offers as well. So living in a cold or mouldy home has a negative impact on physical health, exacerbating respiratory illnesses. We've got food insecurity. So in January 2023, 21.6% of households with children were experiencing food insecurity. And in that same study, of the families that were claiming universal credit, 50% were claiming or saying that they were struggling with food insecurity. There's also consequences to children's education. So kind of not sleeping well, not having the same kind of backgrounds or experiences that their peers may impact on children's regulatory behaviours. And then they're much likely to struggle with things like hunger, tiredness, and general well-being that just mean that they struggle to cope in the structure at school, and therefore miss out on part of that education. When children that are experiencing poverty start school, they're up to 4 months behind their peers. By the time they finish secondary school, it can be up to 18 months behind their more affluent peers. Children are consistently telling us that it affects their mental health, that their parents are so concerned and stressed about bills and money that, you know, it impacts the whole family's mental health. Another example of a consequence is that idea of an increased cost. So it might sound a bit silly that it costs more to be poor, but it's true that if you think about being able to do a big shop at a larger supermarket and get multi-buy offers compared to having to shop where you can walk to it because you don't have a car or don't have access to public transport. That's one small example. There are also things such as the electric tariffs, the prepaid meters compared to direct debit, as well as kind of then leaning on credit or loans to be able to pay for your housing and your gas and electric. There's also the negative stigma that carries with children and families. This has been a long-term serving stigma, and it's especially children who are in school feel it the most. If you have to skip, if you don't have the clean clothes or uniform to attend school, or you have to skip lunch because you don't qualify for free school meals and don't have enough money on your account, or you have to borrow PE kit all the time, it all just builds on those children and young people who are having a difficult time financially at home. There's also specific impacts that poverty is seen to have on arts and culture engagement. So of the arts and cultural organisations that were surveyed in the most recent Arts Council survey, I believe it was, there's 13% of staff working in arts and cultural organisations were from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, compared to 43% of staff that were from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. So you can see there the trajectory from engagement in arts and culture as children and then into those careers as adults. It's something that when we've worked with museums and art galleries recently, that's where they've found that they can have quite a lot of an impact, is by engaging young people who have talent or ambition or just interest in arts and culture, and adopting that and nurturing that with them to open up those careers that you perhaps wouldn't normally think about within arts and culture, but also don't get talked about enough in school. That there's a whole range of opportunities for a whole range of different skills. It doesn't all look like maths and English and science and doctors' applications and lawyer applications for university, that there's other routes into employment and other routes into various workforces. It's not for everyone. Obviously, there's different career paths for different people, but the fact that this is opening doors for children that might not normally see it is amazing. Um, you can see on the right there's a figure around the rates of attendance at museums, galleries, libraries in England, and this is national statistics around socioeconomic classification. So you can see the yellow dot is quite small there, is managerial or professional role, purple is intermediate, pink is semi-routine or routine worker, and green is never worked or long-term unemployed. So you can see the difference that, manage someone that's in a management or professional role is at 45% of them have been to a museum or art gallery in the last year, compared to just 20% of people who have never worked or are long term unemployed. So you can kind of see the impact it has on accessing arts and culture in person in our communities. Quickly going to take you through this. This is something that we've added to our training fairly recently. Molly, who works in the arts, the poverty proofing arts and culture team, has added this from her psychology background. Around 80 years ago, Abraham Maslow created this theory of human motivation. You might think it's a bit strange to be thinking about psychology with the work that we're doing or the things that we're talking about. But actually, it really helps us to understand that that kind of bit that's missing for families. So when we talk about kind of wanting more families to engage with arts and culture, we really need to understand what will motivate them to do that. So when Abraham Maslow was creating his pyramid of needs, he placed the basic physiological needs at the bottom. So breathing, food, water, shelter, clothing, and sleep. We all need those things to be able to kind of function. Some people are kind of better at coping without one or two of those things than others. And families that we're talking about in some instances are struggling to meet those physiological basic needs. And Georgina gave some great examples of that in the work that they're doing with schools. Above that, we've got safety and security. So once you've got your physiological needs met, you can start thinking about looking after your health, gaining employment, looking after a property, being able to care for your family, and having social stability. So that's when people start to feel a sense of community with their local peers, their local family. And then above that is love and belonging. So that's where people start to be a bit more creative, start to venture outside of their family. And that's where they're looking at friendship, wider family interactions, intimacy, sense of connection. And it's that sense of connection and that feeling of belonging that we're looking at in our work with arts and culture. So understanding that for a family to want to come to somewhere, they need to be able to see themselves in that space. Or to be able to engage with something, a child needs to feel a connection with that, or understand that they do belong. Quite often we get asked, what are the rules? What do I need to know before I go there? And it's understanding that's something that families, especially with low incomes, need to have in order to attend. Another study, much more recently, found that lower socioeconomic status or lower income was correlated with a greater sense of isolation and a lower sense of belonging. So families families with a lower income felt a much lower sense of belonging within their community and further afield as well. And then following that, another report found that children from poorer socioeconomic statuses felt a lower sense of belonging as well. So it's not just the adults that are involved that feel this difference, it's also children that will see themselves sitting differently to their peers. So following on from this, it all links back to how we can help. I'll not take you through the full culture cycle because it takes a little bit of time, but the culture cycle is basically a 4-stage process that everyone has that they have to create, adapt, and influence their culture. So culture isn't just the typical things we think about, like art galleries and museums. It's also our day-to-day activities. So it's the macro things like our nationality, our race, ethnicity, social class, etc. but it's also the micro things. It's your occupation, it's your neighborhood, it's your hobbies, and it's your thoughts. And so when we think about ourselves and our own beliefs about what we can and can't do, that influences and is influenced by the practices and activities that we do day to day. And those things are also influenced and can influence the institutions that we engage with. So the things we do at school, the activities we do outside, the wider things that we engage with, and then much bigger than that, that's influenced by every single stage and kind of all flows together, is the foundational ideas of what is good, right, and what we want for society. So, as an individual, all of these stages are influenced and can be influenced by yourself and each other. So, it all flows together. But the reason we bring it up at our training is that for us to understand why children aren't wanting to engage, children and families aren't wanting to engage in arts and cultural practices, we can kind of see that at each of those stages they need to feel welcome, they need to feel that sense of belonging in different elements of their culture cycle, and some of that needs to spark from within themselves, and sometimes that comes from someone visiting your school and sharing something amazing. Sometimes it's seeing something on a school trip that will spark that initial interest. So I'm going to put you into I'm not going to do it, someone else is going to put you into breakout rooms, and in those breakout rooms you might want to take a photo of the screen just to remind yourselves. I'd like you to think about, what does this mean for communities accessing arts and cultural venues? Are arts and cultural venues for people in poverty? And what have you seen in your role, which we've kind of already shared a little bit? And I'll say, can we do this for 6 minutes, 5, 6 minutes?
That's absolutely fine. Thank you, Chloe. My colleague Lucy's just putting everyone into rooms and you'll be asked to join very shortly. And so also come back possibly at 3:35.
Perfect, yeah.
Yep, great.
Would anyone like to feedback what they were discussing or what they kind of we'll move on, and if you want to share it in the chat, you can. Hopefully that was a good discussion around kind of what it looks like for people that you work with. Um, so as Georgina was saying, it's all quite, the statistics are quite kind of saddening, and what I want to kind of express is there is that hope that, and this is a Nelson Mandela quote, but poverty is not an accident like slavery and apartheid. It's man-made and can be removed by the actions of human beings. So the good news is that poverty is policy responsive, and while settings like arts and cultural venues or small organisations can't make the difference, they can't make sure that every single family aren't in poverty. They can certainly make a difference to families' experiences. And we've just been talking while you were in your rooms about the kind of where that money is better sitting, supporting families. And I gave the example of, having made £10 profit from one family having a great day out in a cafe and having lunch in a cafe, or 10 families having a great day out and making £1 from each of those families in profit. And just thinking about it in a slightly different way of feet through the door and smiles on faces rather than the numbers side of things. I'm going to quickly give you a whistle stop tour of what poverty proofing is and where it came from, and then what my team do, and some of the kind of practical things that we've seen as part of that. Poverty proofing started just over 10 years ago. It started with a project asking children to take photos in the northeast of their lives and what it looked like where they grew up. Part of that was also a consultation with the children around what it was like where they lived and what their experience of growing up in the northeast was like. And overwhelmingly, those photos of the most deprived areas all had kind of some things in common. But the conversations with children flowed to the most difficult place to be poor was school. And so Children Northeast found some funding to work with 4 schools to understand what those barriers really look like for children. And we did this by talking to every single child in school around different themes to understand what the barriers are and how school could remove them, but also capturing some of that positive things that schools are doing. And that pretty much is still what the Poverty Proofing Schools team do today. They adapt the model to work with SEN settings, pupil referral units, but they work with early years primary school. Well, we work with early years primary schools, secondary schools, middle schools, any educational setting. And we still talk to as many children as possible to understand their experience. They're the experts of what goes on in their school and what it feels like for their family. So this is some of the things that come out. So on the top there, we've got the kind of main things that you'd think of. So schools charge or maybe charge for prom, they charge for food, clubs, trips, uniform. I'm sure many of you have examples of that in your own experience of potentially having children or hearing friends talking about what the barriers are for or what the school are charging for now. It might just be me and my friends that talk about it because of my job, but it definitely comes up more often than not about, oh, it's World Book Day, we're being asked to donate this, or it's a charity day, we need to send them in non-uniform. Can you believe it's costing this much? Especially when other costs are rising, it becomes much more kind of topic of conversation. But when we talk to children in schools, the bit underneath is what we're hearing and what we're understanding a bit more is that, you know, having those things that cost money actually mean that there are children missing out. There are children struggling with a behaviour system that doesn't support them because they're being punished for not having the right resources, as Georgina mentioned earlier. It's about shifting staff opinions and allowing staff the space to be more empathetic for those children that they might be late, they might fall asleep in your lesson, they might not have great behaviour or attendance, but you know, there might be things beneath that surface layer of what's going on for that child, and understanding that will help understand the problem more widely. So we do this work with schools, health settings, arts and cultural venues, and all of it culminates in a report that gives the setting, the positive practice that's happening, what's really supporting families across the board, whether they're low income or not. And then we also feedback around what the barriers are and what some of the considerations they might want to think about or plan for in the future to support those families a little bit better. So the process for arts and cultural settings is very similar, but we don't quite have the same captive audience of 150 children, for example. So we have to adapt slightly. So what we do is we deliver staff training and consult with staff around what they think the issues are. We also do some information gathering, understanding the context. We deliver consultations at the setting, and then out in the community as well to really understand the voice of the people that aren't going somewhere or aren't engaging with a program or a series of activities, and to understand the barriers are for those families. And then again, it all comes to a report and feeding back to the setting for them to be able to make changes to support low income families. So the poverty proofing work all has three main pillars. So it's around the voice. So understanding that the voice of the community is how you make that real change. It's about place. So knowing that poverty affects different places differently, that we could do a report for a museum in Scotland and give it to a museum in Brighton, but it's not going to make much use because actually the difficulties that those communities face might be very different to each other. You also don't want to make a generic report for all museums to say no one's allowed to do this anymore, because actually in some places it works and in others it doesn't. So for example, charging for tickets, some museums are free and have great access by all different parts of the community, but still struggle with low income families attendance, whereas some charge for tickets and report the opposite. So you know, there's no one shoe fits all, one size fits all for this, and that's why our work is so bespoke and so community led. And then it's around the structural inequalities, so knowing that chipping away at it bit by bit and working with other organisations such as Child Poverty Action Group, we can get that voice to the people that can make changes much further up as well. And then with the work in arts and culture, we also do a review a little bit after the main report to kind of check in and see how things are changing and report on some of that impact of what the changes made have done for families. So I said we were going to talk a little bit about some examples, some case studies. The QR codes on the screen do take you to these case studies, and they're both available online. The Jarrow Hall one is hosted by Kids and Museums, and the Baltic one is hosted by Children North East website. That's because the Kids and Museums staff the Kids and Museums funded that audit, whereas the Baltic was one that we did a few years ago. It's one of the first in arts and culture. So these have both been done a little while ago. So we've done the reviews. We know what some of the impact that the work has had. I'll start with Jarrow Hall. So at Jarrow Hall, there have been many changes that have taken place. The charity that run Jarrow Hall is called Groundwork, and they are very aware of their local community. A lot of their work is community context based, and they already had so much in place. But really, what they've found from the work that are working with us is that external set of eyes, and pointing out some things that you do. It's common practice, and it's always happened that way. And hearing from the community around what that actually means for them. So one of the big things was around ticketing, and actually, when it came down to it, was probably the wording of it. So previously there was a seasonal pass. So when you bought a ticket, it lasts for a whole season or the rest of the season. But that price didn't change, and they're open April to October. So if you buy a ticket in April, you have months and months of time to use that, compared to September, where you've just got a month or two. But now what they've changed it to is that from the date that you buy that ticket, it lasts for 365 days. So if you buy it in July, you can use it until the following July. Nobody's getting a better deal because they've come earlier in the season. And the real value in that is kind of showing people that, we value what you want and what we want you to visit as much as possible. And that's come through in their review. There's also now facilities that really encourage and allow families to engage with the whole offer. So they've got a farm, which is absolutely wonderful. They've got a wall full of wellies. So there's just pegs sticking out the wall with wellies for the biggest feet to the smallest feet. So adults, children, toddlers, babies, there's wellies for everyone. So you can just common practice, just take your shoes off, borrow a pair of wellies, go out on the farm, come back in and swap back. It's wonderful to kind of see that that's there. It's just being used. They also had a look at their secondary spend element. So there is a cafe on site, but it's not hosted by Jarrow Hall. It's hosted by an external company. And so they're quite limited in what they can do in terms of prices at the cafe. But what the feedback was that the community was saying that, the price of the items in the gift shop and the elements of the items in the gift shop, like bottles of kind of botanical water and quite unique and quite higher price items, so glass bottles of fizzy drinks rather than kind of cans of pop that children would recognise. They've swapped those to encourage or allow families to be able to buy a fruit shoot or a packet of crisps from the gift shop if their child gets hungry, rather than having to go to the cafe and spend more. And checking with the cafe and checking with the gift shop's profits are up, and the cafe's profits haven't changed in the same period. So it's not had a negative impact on either, and actually has been positive in the strength in that community's confidence in attending. They've strengthened their community links. They have a toddler event. I think it's at least once a month on a Thursday, and they're really clearly advertised. They're posted in local Facebook groups, and that's where a practitioner that would normally cost £8 or so in another setting, they have in their setting for £2 a toddler. Adults are free, and that's really clear. It's not changing, and the price is upfront with multiple ways to pay, and building that kind of the value of this is something that would normally cost this, but we can enable it for this. Again, it's strengthening that community link. As well as this, everything that's happening is really clearly advertised on A-frames, so chalkboards outside the front of the building, as well as on their social media and their website. So if there's an event going on that will cost extra, that's really clear beforehand. But then if there's a big tray table with arts and crafts supplies on and a poster of kind of what they want you to make with it, it also says everywhere that it's free. Please come and use it. Because what they were finding was parents were hesitant around this. And I think because of all these things, that they are getting more people attending the farm, but also looking around the museum. They've also engaged way more kind of child-friendly activities in the museum, and invested in some 3D replicas of some of the models of things that they had. So rather than touching the artifacts or wanting to touch the artifacts, children can hold the 3D printed version, and kind of see the weight of it and the texture and all of those things that children want to do in a museum. Some of the things around the Baltics change has been much more longer term and not specific examples to share necessarily. There might be some more in that case study if you give it a read, but they've reported a real shift in staff ethos around the kind of their thoughts around what they should be using the space for, the exhibitions and the programming. Their cafe has now become a warm space in the front, and out of chance, some of us have been there in other roles and used the space for kind of a co-working area, but you also see kind of book groups meeting there. And some people take up the offer of the free tea and coffee, but you go up and order it like you would any other drink. And they do have food and other drinks that you can buy. So again, they're kind of keeping it open and friendly, and welcoming. They said it's also impacted how they process applications and funding, as well as business planning and more strategic thinking. They're being far more creative with their kind of applications for things and how they're thinking about that funding. So, got one final breakout activity. We'll be really quick with it. So the task is, we've got a scenario on the left and some key questions on the right. I think we'll all do the same one to save time, but I'll share them with you afterwards, and you can have a think in your own time and reflect. So our scenario is that a museum has a beautiful cafe with a range of paninis, cold sandwiches, and a homemade soup each day. There is a wide range of coffees available, made with freshly ground coffee. There is a kids lunchbox deal at £6 a box, which includes a small drink, a sandwich, and a snack. The cafe is keen to go paper free and cashless, so customers to the cafe can pay via card or contactless. There are some big picnic benches outside of the cafe for customers to use, and a variety of tables inside the cafe also for customer use. So what I'd like you to think about in your breakout rooms very quickly is, what are the barriers? What would it feel like for a low income family in this scenario, and how could the organisation remove the barriers? It's a lot to think about in 5 minutes. If you want to take a quick photo of the screen as you get put into your breakout groups, that would be great. And then when we come back, we'll kind of do some final thoughts before we close. We're rapidly running out of time, so I'll move us along as hoping to share a few more. But like I said, you'll see the others on the slides once they come out. There's no kind of right or wrong answers with this. That, understanding what those barriers are and what the suggestions might be changes based on what people say. But hopefully you got a chance to share what you would do in that situation. If you want to follow up with anything, I'll put my email on at the end if you want to kind of carry on or feedback anything. Just some key questions for you to take away. Again, you can take a photo of this if you want, or the slides can be shared afterwards. But some of the key questions as a starting point for you is really understanding how you are listening to that local community, what methods are you already using, and evaluating how they're working. As an outsider, what information can you find out about yourselves online? So things to check is it obvious what the cost of entry is, or that it's free if it is? How do you travel to the venue or session? What resources are required to take part? So kind of, if you put yourself in someone else's shoes, completely stranger to the organisation or the place that working with. What can you find out without communicating with anyone? What best practice examples are there for us to borrow from and trial? So maybe some of the things in those case studies or some of the things that you've talked about in your groups. And then where are those inadvertent barriers in terms of personal practice in your day-to-day interaction with families, children, and community? Um, and that can be quite a difficult one to think about. What are the inadvertent barriers you might be putting in, but also around that organisational level of policy and procedure. And thank you so much for having me. That's everything for me to share. Hopefully that's been really helpful and a chance to discuss. I'll pop my email in the chat as well and stop sharing now. If anyone has any questions, we might have time for one. But thank you so much. I'll hand back over to Kate.
Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. And both thank you, Chloe and Georgina earlier for that really stimulating talk and highlighting the very many different kind of facets of kind of poverty, particularly for young people and within school context and within cultural venues and cultural programs. Please feel free to ask any